I call that the magic of machine learning. Python, JavaScript. Let us help you explain how we do it rather than show off. And I just had this idea like, hey, wait a second.
Welcome to the Accelerometer. I'm Dr. Matthew Mirman, founder and CEO of Anarchy. Today I'm delighted to be filming in Amsterdam, where I'm being joined by Bob van Luijt, the CEO of the most legendary startups of this age of generative AI, Weaviate. Weaviate is a vector database which fundamentally exists to enable deeply semantic searches, image-based search, AI-enabled recommendations, and more. These kinds of databases are not exactly new, but Weaviate took the field a step further by being truly first class about embeddings and being open source. As Anarchy is committed to open source infrastructure, I'm really honored to have Bob here. Can you tell us a little bit more about Weaviate?
Yeah, sure. So Weaviate is founded in, or like actually not the company. So we have the company Weaviate and we have the open source project Weaviate. So the project was opened, and I think that was in 2015. And embeddings played an important role in that because I was working with embeddings, but it was not a vector database yet. So what I was working on was, I was working on a project where I wanted to improve search results. And early on that happened with academic texts, and not too long after that it was related to IoT projects. And what I wanted to do was this. I wanted to solve the problem that there were like different manufacturers and they had certain types of documentation or language in the APIs and what was coming out. But the problem was that these different organizations had different language to describe similar products. And back then I was working as a freelancer, and I joined a call. I vividly remember this by a guy named Paul Groth. He was actually on our own podcast, a guest. And that was the first time that I was introduced to vector embeddings. And this was like glove. And so single word embeddings, that's where it all got started. And I just had this idea like, hey, wait a second. What if I don't try to make certain mappings or certain graph structures, but what if I try to use the centroids of the words in the embedding? So for people listening who don't know what that is, that's the vector embedding is a dimensional representation of the word. And if you have a sentence of words, you can group them together, pick the middle, and then represent, in this case, the data object. Am I able to retrieve the data object by searching through vector space? And that worked okay-ish. It was like, it was not, I mean, it's not where it is today, but it was working okay-ish. And I was like, hey, there's something here. And maybe a year later or something, I went to Google I/O. I was sitting somewhere in the audience, and I remember that Sandeep Pichai, he said, I actually fact-checked this is actually true, that he said, we're going to move from mobile first to AI first. And I was like, oh, I know what they're doing. They're using vector embeddings to index these pages or, whatever, or the ads or whatever And I was like, this is a thing. And then I met my co-founder, Etienne, who's currently the CTO at Weaviate. And he was like, hey, wait a second. There's actually a huge opportunity from an architectural perspective to build a purpose-built database for vector embeddings. And if you go back in history, you see that the first iteration of Weaviate, we called it a knowledge graph. And they were like, then we had the word smart graph. And then it turned into vector database. And it always had the vector embeddings at its core. But I just, where vector embeddings are now and how everybody is using them, I could not have predicted that almost now and 9 years ago.
So back then, were people bringing these embeddings with like Word2Vec?
Yeah.
I remember being at Google when that was happening, and they were really pushing us to use Word2Vec in all of our like 20% time projects.
Yeah. So what's so interesting about it is that it's a I call that the magic of machine learning. And what I mean with that is there's something, and I never found a better term than, as I like to call it, magical, is at the moment that you move through vector space, but the way that you move through it by, adding words, subtracting words, those kind of things, and something logical comes out from a linguistic perspective, that's magical. And I remember also when I was on stage presenting how Weaviate worked, like the early. So the API today is not much different from back in the days. The whole database itself is, but the API isn't. I mean, changed a bit, but like not a lot. And that I was on stage, and people asked questions like, "So you have like a keyword mapping somewhere?" I was, no. So it took me a long time with the people at Google and other startup founders to really explain to people, no, this is a completely different way of representing data. And it's just, those, sometimes, I have like nostalgia back for those days, because it was so much fun traveling around and showing people what you could do with that technology. So it's, so that, man.
What was the first aha moment that you got when you showed it to somebody?
You mean my aha moment, or for
somebody else's aha moment?
I quickly figured out that if people tried it out themselves. So I was on stage and people were like, huh? Yeah, but how does that work? And at some point, somebody, and I forgot where it was, but somebody in the audience, because the first data set that we had were news articles. And there was somebody in the audience who just, yelled a query. So how does this query perform? And he just yelled, and I was like, sure. So I was like, tap, and write results, right? And so I was like, I need to make this a thing. So I showed people the data set. I said, like, I have like from the New York Times, just a handful of articles, right? Just the Atlantic, what have you, and I was just ask me something, ask me a query, and and I'll just type it into the API and see what comes out. And that was really the aha moment for people, that they were like, oh, there's no trickery here. This actually works.
So what is some idea or a thought that you have that you really want to tell the world about before you die?
I'm now focusing a lot on work. So it's something work related, because it's some. And then when I started the business, I was convinced that doing my job well was doing as much as I could in a day, right? So you know these tweets, right? Or how do we call them nowadays, access or something, where people go like, oh, I get out of bed at 5 a.m. and then I do blah, blah, blah. And I got convinced that the exact opposite is true. That if you run any business, the best way of doing it is if you're able to do absolutely nothing. And I'm happy to double click on what I mean with that, but that is what I'm convinced about. So success is being able to run a successful business by doing nothing.
I like that. It reminds me of this book that I read called Who Not How. And they're just like, anytime you're thinking about like whether you want to be doing something or not, it means that you're not good at it and you should find somebody else to do it.
Exactly. And so one of the things so I am guilty of something, and that is I really want to write this down in blog posts, when I just, when I really got to the core, the essence of this idea. But I'm guilty of a Google search when I started Weaviate. That literally said, what does a startup CEO actually do? I was like, I don't know what to do. I was super busy because I was like DevRel, marketing, product, web designer, the whole shebang in one. I was just doing everything, right? And then one of my co-founders at Channel was like working on the core database, right? But everything around it, I was kind of working on that. So then when the company grew, I kind of figured out there's 3 things that I need to do. And I need to, in no particular order, I need to make sure that there's a great culture, that people like to work at the company, or that we find the right people to join that culture. The second thing is to have a vision. And vision is a very complex thing because it's better to articulate a vision rather than keep searching for one. And the third one is just have enough money, right? And money in the most ideal way of getting money is, I always like to say, is revenue. And but if we're still building, then maybe there are investors who want to help us, right? So that's and how I visualize that is you have these spinning discs, right? So on a stick, right? So where you need to spin these discs. And those or these plates, I should say. And it's basically you have these 3 plates, they're spinning. And the better you get at spinning these plates, the longer they keep spinning, right? And if all 3 of them are spinning in harmony, you can just sit down and relax and let the people in the company do what they're good at. And then if some starts to wobble, and you spin it again, right? And that is where that idea comes from. Like if the utopia, the best way of running a business is if these discs just, or these plates keep spinning, these 3 plates. So that's where the idea comes from of saying like, the state of utopia in running a business is doing nothing.
I like this analogy of spinning plates. It's very similar to juggling, but just one of these things that very few people can do.
Yes.
Not everybody can be, like, completely blunt, not everybody can be a CEO.
No, exactly. And the thing is that and I also don't think that everybody should want that, because it's just I mean, I sometimes go to these events where like you have all these CEOs, and there's just a weird bunch of people. So it's like I mean, it's fun. It's like you can definitely have a laugh, but it's like it's so interesting and it's so diverse. But the point is like you somehow, and the market plays a role in that, right? So if you have a market fit, there's a market pull, and then you need to figure all these things out. So you're super busy because you're constantly tweaking and optimizing the plate to spin properly. It's like because if you make a mistake, if you sit down too soon and the plate falls off, your company dies. So it's tricky, but it's and also one thing that we do in the company is that our organization is very flat. So we're now like 60 something people, and there's only one step between me and the rest of the organization, and I did that on purpose because as I always like to say, is like, yes, there's this tiny hierarchy at Weaviate that's like in this one step in between, but if you want to see expertise, you have to flip the chart around, because the expertise in all the people working and putting their shoulders to the wheel to make things work. And I want to keep it as long as I can. I want to keep it like that, because I think that's the most efficient way, the most organic way to keep pace and keep moving forward.
I was just going to ask, I was calculating in my head, that's like 3 one-on-ones per day at least.
Oh, no. So this, I mean, sometimes, but the thing is that's another principle. It's very trust-based. So one thing that I do that people listening that might be thinking of running a startup that might find this interesting. So a question that I sometimes get is like, well, if you have so many direct reports, right, how do you manage that? And I manage it by sampling. So there might be our developer growth team might do something, and they organize an event. And there was recently an event in Amsterdam, and I was in Amsterdam, so like we are now. So I joined that event. And if I would have been in New York, I would have gone to the New York event, whatever, right? So I went to the event, and it was fantastic. Everything was great. It was well organized, and there were so many people. It was just great. So based on that sample, I'd be like, okay, so the events that the developer growth team is organizing are great. Or if I want to try something out, I read a little bit of documentation. And if the documentation is great, then I'm going to assume that the rest of the documentation is great as well. And that's how I do it. So, and I only interact with people, as in me towards them. Otherwise, I mean, if they ask me a question, obviously there's also another path of interaction. when I'm concerned about one of these things, that I was like, hey, what's going wrong here, or those kind of things. So it's it's super organic.
So back to this idea of spinning plates, I actually have a fun anecdote that I really wanted to share. So when I finished YC, I was going through a co-founder breakup, and I was just super overwhelmed by everything that was going on. Like, I was like, how do I actually run a startup entirely alone? I gotta go and I gotta speak to customers. I gotta be building this product myself. I think I gotta go and talk to investors myself. I gotta go and figure out marketing, and I have to be going and hiring right now. Like, I went to my partners, like, how do I deal with this? And it's just like, actually, you're running it. You can choose to do one of these things at a time. So I did that for a few months. I came back a few months, and I was like, okay, well, I did all those things at a time, but I feel like I'm falling behind on each one of these things now. And they were like, well, actually, as a founder, you have to do all of them at the same time again.
Yeah.
I think at that point, like, this notion of juggling really finally clicked to the spinning plates. And yeah, I guess I'm just wondering, at what point did all of that come together for you?
So when we did our Series A, I was able to hire a couple of people to get this. It's called a cell structure. It's by I'm blanking on his name. It's a Dutch entrepreneur. Winston is his last name, but I forgot his first name. But it's that cell structure where you basically say, okay, you have a cell, and it's like the maximum size of a cell is like a 2 pizza team, and that cell that has a head, and the role of the cell is super clear. So we have I don't know, at Weaviate, I don't know, Emma is the head of customer success. So it's very clear what she and her team, what they do. That's like they're doing customer success. And the reason it's called a cell is because it grows organically, and at some point it splits. And then you have 2 cells, right? And then with a new head and those kind of things. Now, how is that related to your question? I had a hunch, like a feeling that this is the best, that this was the best way for the culture we were building and the way that the company was growing to structure the company. And when we did our Series A, I had capital to actually do that, to execute on that. And when that worked, I was like, so I understand it. This makes a ton of sense. And so that was my aha moment, because I saw it in action. When I saw it in action, I was like, this works.
What is something that you think that is particularly shocking about Weaviate, that you think if the world knew this and behaved like this, developers would be working faster, startups would be making more money?
So the answer sits somewhere, so I'm thinking out loud here. So about what I like to call AI native applications. And what I mean with that is that we see that a lot of existing applications where people apply the models and the database is that they kind of sprinkle it over their existing applications, or there's like a status quo bias of like, this is how we build applications, or this is how we build apps. The combination of using these models with the vector databases is it's a completely it's a new paradigm. So I sometimes try to invite people to just lean into that paradigm shift. And it's sometimes very hard to articulate for a specific use case or a specific industry what that means. But I'm trying to invite people, like, just double down on the opportunities that you see here. And this, for example, has to do with, we have a concept in Weaviate that we call generative feedback loops. So basically, what you do with RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, is basically you have a query, you select a bunch of candidates, you shoot it into a generative model. It's a little bit primitive now because it goes through the prompt, but it kind of works. And then you give the model prompt to do something with it, right? So there can be, I don't know, if you have reviews, they say, okay, show me all positive reviews, you get them out, and then summarize them for me. It's very similar. It's a simple pipeline. What a generative feedback loop does is that it stores whatever comes out back into the database with a vector embedding. So an example that we have is that we have Airbnb data, and that has incorrect or missing descriptions. So we have the price, we have the location, et cetera, the name of the host, what have you. So you query the database, you run it to the model, you say, okay, generate a description based on this information for the listing. You store that back with a vector embedding in database, and now if you search for, I'm looking for a great place in New York to walk my dog, then it, shows something near a Central Park. Now, this is often, the power of this sits actually in giving a prompt to the generative model to do something with your database. So rather than having a human agent interacting with the data in your database, you tell the model, you have access to the database. I give you full CROT support on the database. This is the problem that I have. Good luck. Please solve it for me. That paradigm shift, people are so still hung up onto traditional ways of organizing and structuring data. They say, no, you can that's just status quo bias. You can just let go all of that, let the model solve it for you. And I hope that to answer your question, that is something that in this year, the year 2024 just started, that big aha moment for developers or people doing data management or analysts or what have you, that aha moment comes. Like the model really becomes an independent agent, and I mean the generative model, to interact with our data.
I have two comments on this. There was a hackathon submission winner that won in a generative AI event in San Francisco. And I think what they built was a back-end server that was literally just an LLM. Like no database, no way of figuring out the PHP. In came the request, the LLM processed the request, kept the giant context window or request that had ever been sent, and then hand constructed the React. I thought that was pretty cool. And the other is more of a question. So right now we're seeing LLMs become actually huge, and the context window sizes that you're able to use with LLMs is also really, it's growing quite fast. Do you think that that's a viable alternate method to do essentially what you're describing, just grow your context window, just scale indefinitely?
So before I answer that question, may I quickly respond to the first point that you made?
Yeah.
So what I think is so important right now is that so sometimes they ask me to be a judge at these events, and then I'll go, and it's great, and and I'll go there, and I recently also did one in San Francisco. So then as a judge, you just see all these, what people are building. And to my previous point about status quo bias, 99% of people are building something that already exists, but then they try to do it better with an LLM. The example that you just gave is a wonderful example of really trying to do something new. And I always urge these people with these, and the majority of people at these hackathons, they also try to invent a business, like in the weekend, right? Over the weekend, so we're gonna use this element to just run our new startup or create a new startup. And I always urge people, just use that weekend to do something super weird or creative, something artistic, something far out. So the example that you were just giving, I remember that I saw a video on YouTube like a year ago or something, where somebody was just sending SQL queries into the prompt, and it just storing data, doing a select, star, and then actually the model gave back the right answers. That kind of creative stuff, that's fantastic. I love that kind of stuff. So that brings me to your second question. So, is the large context window the next, answer of storing data in the model? Maybe. And what I do think is important, and this is a little bit on a meta level, is that, and at some point research showed like, well, actually currently the large context windows don't work very well because there's like this dip in the middle of the data that we put into the context window, that it's like it starts to hallucinate more, but whatever, right? So it's like I forgot the name of the paper.
It'll be solved.
Exactly. Well, exactly. And a knee-jerk reaction that startup founders or people in a startup often have is like, oh no, look at this paper, it doesn't work. So just, I really think that's the wrong mindset. You constantly need to keep looking forward. And if these kinds of ideas emerge of like, can we do that in a context window? And such a problem here, just somebody will solve it one day, right? And then as a company, you just need to be ready to anticipate on that, right? So I remember that I was very excited about the research that was happening with I believe it was called Mehmet, where they might be wrong, but what they try to do is basically that they try to in real time to change the weights. So for example, if you had like Michael Jordan is a basketball player, and then they change it to Michael Jordan is a soccer player. And then they ask the model, what sport does Michael Jordan play? And then it says like soccer. Turned out that doesn't work very well because you're basically putting a lie into the model, if you will, from the world representation it has on the moment that it was trained. Because if you now ask the question, who won somewhere in the 90s the NBA Cup with Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman, then the answer is Michael Jordan. But if Michael Jordan is a soccer player, that can be true. So the point I'm trying to make with this is like a lot of that kind of research is happening of like, how will we manipulate the information that's stored in the model as close to real time as possible? Is it going to go through the content window? Is it going to go through manipulating the weights? Is it going to go through some form of embedding representation, what have you? And I think we need to look at all these kind of things. And I somehow was hoping that there was something to the whole Mehmet thing. It turned out that it's not. But we need to keep looking like what's happening right now. And as a startup, you need to adopt and do whatever is happening in the space. So I don't know which one will win, but time will tell. And it's just super exciting to see what people are doing to try to solve the problem.
I think that leads to a very interesting question, which is, how are you preparing for if this other technique, solves a lot of these problems that Weaviate is also meant to solve?
Yeah, so I am. So weirdly enough, I'm not too concerned about that because it's not even weird. It's actually, I think I can make quite a logical argument for it. But doing these kind, especially when it comes to like an academic kind of way, right? So it's not optimized for these production use cases, right? So something new happens, something new, a new thing emerges, how you can solve this problem. And it's rarely the case that it's like completely unique. That tomorrow, that somebody would publish a paper tomorrow that is so novel, that is so unheard of. That almost never happens. It always is built on top of existing building blocks. So I would not be surprised that that if the answer is not purely in the vector embeddings and how we store and represent them now, if that's the case, then it's not gonna be like miles away from how Weaviate currently is working. So then we might need to create a new type of index. We might need to create a different type of representing the weights or the embeddings or what have you. But we just need to keep an outlook on what's happening. But I'm not too concerned that if we observe it early on, that we can just adjust our course if it happens at all, because we don't know.
One thing that I am particularly excited for, or I think that like we're going to be seeing in the future, is having these vector databases in the loop in fine tuning or in training. And I'm actually a little bit shocked that we haven't seen it. We've seen instruction tuning, where you have people like an army of PhD students write a text about what to do and then solve a problem, and then you give that to a model. And we also, the techniques that ChatGPT are based on is literally people going through the text and inputting links for how it should be using an API call in the middle of a text. And I'm just wondering, why don't we do that with RAG in the loop? And what is something that you're particularly optimistic about, some technology that we're not currently seeing that you think that people are going to start working a ton on?
So I 100% agree with what you were saying. And so that's also my answer. So this is what we call these generative feedback loops. So what you just described, just having the vector database as part of the basically automating the training process, if you will, or augmenting the training process. We would call it a form of a generative feedback loop.
Of course, you need to take the derivative of your database.
Sure. So I'm not. I didn't say that, it wouldn't come in challenges, right? But the thing, one of the things that I've learned is that if you get, so take the example of earlier in the conversation, just doing a vector-based search. Just that. Just say, okay, I have a little tiny data object, and this tiny data object contains two words, Eiffel and tower. And I'm going to show you on through vector space, I'm able that if I search for Paris, that has a closer relation to the Korean in London. For me and people in the space back then, the small group of people traveling around the world, this took us years to show people how that worked. So with these kind of new concepts, right, where we say, okay, we're gonna have the model and the database working together in harmony, or as we like to say, weaving together. That's gonna take years for people to really, for the majority of people to understand how that works, because people like yourself have a very unfair advantage in understanding how these things work, but you do not represent the the average people creating these kind of solutions with vector database and models. So we need to help people, and we need to show people how you can do that. That's why at Weaviate we have a relatively big developer growth and developer relations team to show the world these are all the things you can do with it. And then you keep repeating until until the hive mind has its moment of epiphany, right? And then all of a sudden you go, oh, yeah, I get it. But we're not there yet.
I read that you need to repeat things. Like when you're just I'm learning how to be a manager for my first time. It's super weird coming from academia. But I read, what is it, when you're telling people on your team things, if you're just I think that the website would look good this way. I want people to send more positive emails. You need to repeat everything 8 times before people will hear it.
Oh, I think if you only have to repeat things 8 times, then you've done an amazing job in hiring, because it's often a little bit more, and that is not because that's not because we all work with smart people, of course, but it has to do with and that's something I'm actually fascinated by, is that these ideas that we have in our head, and then if we translate it into language, that we lose so much context. It's so hard for people, and that's also why I think it's important to have retention of people working at the company, because it's only over time that people start to see that context. So saying it 8 times is great. I think it's close to 800 times, right? And that is because people need to understand all the nuances of the context, right? So why do we use that type of language in the email? Why do we want to have those types of colors on the website, right? that is extremely complex. Right? Why do we design the API the way we do? Why do we, well, and so on and so forth. And so it's like, it's about consistency in repeating it over and over again, and just simple, clear language.
I mean, but yeah, if it's only 8 times for your team, you gotta think about how many times you have to say it to the rest of the world.
Yes. No, exactly. And so one fascination that I have is that you have this diffusion of innovations model. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's like you have the innovators, the early adopters, early majority, late majority, and so on and so forth. It's like an 80-20 distribution, right? And it's bell curve, and at the bell in the middle. That I'm interested in these people. Those are just developers. People just might have like a 9-to-5 job as a developer, and they work, I don't know, at a bank or wherever they work, right? And they just want to build cool stuff with AI. We need to help these people. It's our task to help these people be successful in what they're building. And one way of doing that is clear content and repeating it over and over, examples showing this is how you do it, let us help you be successful. That cannot be underestimated how important that is. And in our bubble, bubble being the people who are like working in these, in this specific case in ML/AI from the early days, we know so much, we have so much context that we sometimes forget that there's this huge group of people who just don't know, and we need to help them. And we're also at risk of alienating these people, right? Because by using complex language and those kind of things. So simple language, repeat it, show it over and over and over again.
Definitely. So what's another non sequitur? What is something that is particularly unique about the Weaviate vector database? I know that there are other vector databases on the market. I guess what is something that you think really sets you guys apart?
Yeah, so that's actually related to the answer to the previous question, in the sense like, so let me give you one example. So we have the modular ecosystem. Because the question is like, these embeddings, not for everybody it's easy to create them, right? So if we say, okay, if you use, I don't know, a third-party service like OpenAI or Cohere or what have you, just fill in your API key, database takes care of the rest. Or if people want to run their own models, those kind of things, just to make it easier for people to work with the models in combination with the database. Another example that comes out of that is that the majority of vector databases take as input only vector embeddings. You can do that with Weaviate too. However, if you want to do hybrid search, you can also send in just text queries. And one of the things that we start to notice is that for a lot of developers, that's just easier. They're like, oh, it's actually easier for us to just throw text at it. And yeah, apparently it creates a vector embedding in the background, but I'm not aware of that. And so to answer your question, I think lowering the barrier for people to start building end-to-end applications with the database, that is something that sets us apart. Just make it easier to build end-to-end applications. So I think there's a case to be made early on for being a little bit scrappy. So if you have a demo, for example. So think about the situation that you are watching it, you're sitting in an audience and somebody's giving a demo on stage of a completely new thing. Let's take the example you just mentioned of somebody that we do SQL inside the LLM, and they go, it's such an amazing thing. And so, and you show it, you set a query, and the thing goes like wildly off the rails. You get some laughs, but it's also real and it's new. So
it's about expectation management.
Yes, and there is a case to be made to be a little bit scrappy now and then, right? So because the danger, there's a form versus content danger. And what I mean with that is if we create infrastructure, and we being like anybody who creates infrastructure, or any deep tech product for that matter, we have the content, so what we're actually building, and we have form around it, right? So it's like how we talk about it, how we show it, how we market it, and those kind of things. And I see startups now, especially what's happening in AI, who are very, very good at the form side of things. But then if you look what's the actual content, then you're like, one could be, critical about that. And the problem is, in my eyes, is that that if there's not a healthy balance, it can also be the other way around, that you build an amazing product, but you just don't know how to show the world what you do. And the problem that you're dealing with is that it's an unhealthy balance that hurts the culture, the people working on the product, and those kind of things. Because if it's balanced the wrong way around, that it's just only like product focused, content focused, and people might go like, yeah, but nobody's buying it, nobody wants to have it. But if you do it the other way around, they go like, we're selling crap, right? So it's like and if you're early stage, you just don't have a lot of money. So so you need to be a little bit scrappy, and there's something to it, right? So I love that also with a DevRel team, and they have like drones and stuff, and they fly them around, but it's like not like a Hollywood level drone flying, right? It's developer flying with a drone, filming that and putting that on LinkedIn, and I think that's very cool. That is super cool because it gets people in the into like, oh, this is the start, this is what they're building, we're excited for them, and that kind of stuff. So I don't know what you showed, but it shouldn't be too bad. But there's something that if it's too polished, if I get a deck from a startup that's too polished, I like, so when are you building product, right? So that's it's balance.
I have an anecdote for that. Is at the very beginning. This is not my first startup. So in my first startup, the first version of this product that we built looked janky, and all of my friends loved it because it looked janky.
Yeah.
And then we spent 6 months. We made a much higher quality version of this product. We put a ton of engineering effort into it, but we were just out there and talking to people at the same time. And then when it did finally release, we were shocked because everybody was just like, no, you're a big company, like you were evil right now. I was like, what? We're like 3 people in a garage. Evil? So the second time I built a company, the first thing that I did was our demo product that I insisted it's got to look like a 90s Linux website, because who could hate a 90s Linux website?
Exactly. No, but I agree with you. It's like if you build infrastructure, the first demo should be API calls, because because what you're signaling with that is like, first of all, the audience you wanna reach are people who understand what you're doing, and if you're doing something new, that's a small group, right? Those are the innovators. By showing it from the perspective of the API, you show there's no fluff. It's just API calls, and this is what the thing does that comes out of them. That later, to reach the majority, and that you need to help them with graphical user interfaces, and maybe if you want to sell into the enterprise, that you need to have certain content on your web, sure. Not when you're early stage. When you're early stage, you indeed want to have those kind of websites. Recently I saw the website from a company called I believe it was like your website actually is a good example, but because I'm blank on the other name, but your website is a great example. It's like you see, this is a startup building something new.
Did you just call our website janky?
So it's but in a good way. That's good. That's what you want. I remember when we started, I thought that purple was a beautiful color. So the whole website was purple, and the first DevRel I hired, Sebastian, the first conversation is like, so I looked at your website. it hurts my eyes, man. That was like that was the first thing he said, and he was in hindsight he was right, but it's that's part of it, and that's for him was interesting. It's like, okay, there's a lot of work to do here. So it's that's in a good way. There's just something weird about that is that's like a child in a suit. That's like, I mean, it's funny to have a child in a suit, but it's kind of weird, right? Because he just wants to run outside and play and do whatever.
But also, that like 6-year-old that you knew that wore a suit to school every day, like he's probably off. He's the CTO of IBM or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's just there's something awkward to it. So I don't know why I got with a metaphor, but there's something off. So a tech startup needs to be a little bit scrappy, just sprinkled over it.
You also have to figure out how to take that like extremely small amount that you have and turn that into something like crazier and turn that into bigger. Find all of the hacks to multiply whatever you have. For example, like this setup, like normally you want like a nice podcast setup. You have to go and hire an entire team, travel with you. Each camera has a person standing behind it. Like you have an entire production crew, and like we're a 4-person startup. Like,
yes,
can't do that.
Yeah, so that's something I call the wine problem. So it's the so when back in the days when I was a student, and if he with friends bought a bottle of wine, then we bought wines that were like $6, and then during the weekends, and we just maybe we're like. It was like weekends, so like, okay, let's go for an expensive bottle. So now we didn't buy the 6 bottle wine, but like the 12, a $12 a bottle of wine. And it was that wine was definitely twice as good as the 6, less of a headache, that kind of stuff, right? So, but I mean, you can buy bottles of wines like $5K. You can spend $10K on a bottle of wine, and surely those wines are better than the $12 wines. However, that doesn't grow in a linear fashion. So a $12 wine might be twice as good as a $6 wine, but a $24 wine might not be twice as good as a $12 wine. So, but the problem is, although the distribution is linear, right? It's like at some point it gets harder and harder to actually, it flattens, right? So it's harder and harder to see what the value. But if you want to do stuff better, you need to, at some point, if your podcast becomes like a wild success, at some point you will hire somebody to help you with these kind of things, right? But so then it becomes better, but it doesn't become better in a linear fashion. It's not. I mean, you have a beautiful setup here, right? But if this now would be humans with handheld cams doing it, I'm not sure that the podcast would be twice as good. It would definitely be twice as expensive, at least.
The diminishing marginal podcast.
Yes, exactly. There's like just diminishing returns, right? So and that's like and I always I call the wine problem because it's like a visual way to visualize it. So.
What insane things have you seen people do with Weaviate?
Oh, yeah, I have. So, I can tell you. So, how should I tell this story? I was once in Mountain View, and I met these 3 guys at an event. It was actually organized by Google. And they're like, hey, you're the Weaviate guy. We're a Weaviate user. Oh, yeah, great. So, and we were there for the models that were presented by Google. And they said, we store everything in Weaviate. And then they had this whole thing that they were not using Google's models. So that guy from Google asked, like, so why are you not using our models? Why are the open source models better? No, and it was very vague. He was like, no. So, the thing we make is we can't do that through like APIs. We can only do that like if we host the models ourselves. And we say, well, why? So they were like, so what does your product do? So turned out that they built this NSFW bot. And they were storing the data in Weaviate. And they had these open source models because if the actual text, if they would send it over the API, they just got back like an error message. They just couldn't do that, right? And we were sitting there, and everybody was like, "Oh, okay, thanks for sharing." And that was like the most. That was like, I mean, the most awkward thing that I saw somebody build. I was like, we were like, oh, but it was super funny. But it's the nice thing is that that there are always these little funny things that people are building. Or I remember on a more serious note, that very early on, that NASA published this paper that they built something with Weaviate to analyze like data come from satellites and stuff, and it was really cool because that felt so like a grown-up use case, right? That was like years ago, and I was like, oh really? Did you guys build a Weaviate? Yeah, we did. And I was like, so that's, I mean, it's like not maybe like a weird or rich use case, but it was more like a that was really different. So, and I enjoyed that a lot. But when you asked that question, that story came to mind, and I was like, and everyone was sitting there. I was like, oh yeah, gotcha. So that was very, very funny.
So when they were hosting their NSFW conversation, were they hosting it on your like hosted platform, or were they hosting it themselves with Weaviate?
They hosted them themselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess that leads into the question of like, do you have content moderation policies for your hosted platform? And is that even something that is feasible if you're building a public database, something like, Supabase or Cockroach or I guess Weaviate?
So that's a great question. And believe it or not, I get similar questions sometimes because, with the models and those kind of things, and sometimes they're more like in the ethical realm, right? And so currently the answer is no, we don't. And so with open source, you don't know what people do, right? So that's like impossible to check. With your managed platform, theoretically speaking, you could, but you don't want to do that because you're not allowed to do what people are actually storing inside the database. So the way that I currently deal with these kind of situations is you just go on use a moral compass, right? And so if you see a company, and we didn't have any issues with that, but if you see a company sign up where you go like, oh, what's this, or what are they trying to do, you try to figure that out, and then you just go on your moral compass. But that goes for any ethical question that people can have around the data that they're storing in the database or that they're generating with the models or those kind of things. I'm very aware of it, but luckily the 99.99% of the use cases are very, are just normal, regular use cases. But we don't have. I would feel very bad to put a filter in my behind my API to try to figure out what people are storing inside the database. That's none of my business, right?
Have you ever gotten into a situation where the Taliban has come up to you and asked, like, can we use Weaviate?
No, I've not been in that situation. But I mean, you do get in situations where there's like certain countries where because Weaviate is literally used almost all over the world. So if I look at my website statistics, right? So almost the whole map is like blue, and that's the color of the tool we use, with a few obvious exceptions, like I don't know, North Korea or something, right? So there are countries in there that have, just from a governmental perspective, so they're like sanctions or those kind of things. And I have been in situations where these companies reach out, and that's just in a very normal, professional way. Like, hey, we want to, we use your technology, we want to buy one of the service, but that's tricky because we're just a startup, right? And you don't want to get into issues selling to. So it's that did happen, yeah. And then we said like, sorry, but can't help you, but you can use the open source technology. So that has happened, yeah.
Do you think you would be confronted with all of these ethical challenges as frequently if you weren't in generative AI?
No, absolutely not. Because I cannot imagine, it's hard for me to imagine that in the early days of MongoDB that they got these kind of questions. So what are people storing it? That's hard. Maybe people did, but it's hard to imagine. But you know what the thing is? It's also, and that kind of also annoys me a little bit. There's like these naysayers. You try to do something new, and then people ask this kind of. I once spoke at a conference, and that was when Weaviate was like 40 people or something, and I got a question from the audience. If I had something like a question, do you have an ethical board? I'm like, I'm a 40-person startup. No. And I was completely surprised about the question. And
Yes, the answer to that is yes, I'm the ethical board.
exactly, it's like we have exactly, but I was like, we have a moral compass that we just. But no, of course I don't. I mean, we're building a shipping product. That's the focus. And but that person was an academic. Sent me a long email. It was not happy with my answer. But I said like, I'm sorry. It's like I said it's the. We have a moral compass with the company, and that's and we try to do the best we can. But we're also just shipping product, please, right? And but for some people, it's a they. Okay, I mean, some people don't. Some people don't see that. So that is like sometimes you see that with young people when they go and work for a bank or something, right? And then every month they get their salary. And they kind of assume that money is always there. And especially when you run a startup, that's not the case. You need to build and ship great product because otherwise it's just not going to work. So that is priority number 1, 2, 3, and 4 at the same time, right? And so if you get in such a situation, you deal with it when you get in the situation. And if you grow big as a company and it's a recurring issue, again, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not, but I'm not gonna, hire people to think about that if it's not a problem, especially not now in the 60 people company. But I do get those questions way more often than if it's not Gen AI related. That's a good point.
So what was getting your first investment like?
The first investment that I got was I did in Holland. We were part of a small accelerator, but if I'm counting an actual investment, so there's our seed round that was from Zeta in San Francisco. I was on a holiday, and it was in between COVID, so there was like when there was like it was like a half lockdown where you could go to hotels and stuff, but there was also kind of a lockdown happening, and I was with my brother and my dad. We were just on a short holiday in France. I was like, I think the investment is gonna happen. So I had my phone open, and I was scrolling down, and we had like almost no money, and we raised 1.1, and all of a sudden it was like $1.1 million on the bank account, and I was like, I never seen so much money in my life. And you of course asking what led up to that, but the reason that I started with this was because I was so proud in that moment. I was like, we have this idea, we're working on it, and somebody is willing to give us money to explore this further and work on it. I was so proud on that moment. And what led up to it was this was the only time in my funding history that I had real pitch decks. I saw that a pitch deck, and I had to, and I was like, shopping it around and showing it to people. And after that, with everything happened in ML, that went always smoother. But that was the first and we started the company. It was like, we're going to try it a year. And if it doesn't work out, we're just going to quit. And so we started. We didn't give ourselves any salary or anything. So we started working on Weaviate. And pretty soon, actually, the first conversations happened that I think we were like maybe half year in or something. And then it became very serious. So I was like, oh, this is nice. This works. So it was I think, and to answer your question, the best way to explain is I was so proud. Like, somebody is willing to give us the opportunity to try it out and see if it works, if we can make it work. And so I was super proud. That will be my answer, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, it means somebody believes in you.
Yes.
I feel like there's a lot of, like, in the bootstrapper and in the, like, even the YC circles, there's a lot of anti-fundraising going around right now. And people are like, well, you shouldn't get validation of it. But it is validation. You know, like, for a lot of people, they never built startups, like, even in their own communities. Like, especially if you're the sort of person that's going to build a startup, you have weird ideas.
Yes.
And everybody around you, like, will often think your ideas are weird. So finally, somebody's telling you, like, your idea is not that weird. Like, this could actually be huge.
Yeah, and there's something else also very important to mention, and that is the there's just a bucket of if you want to take VC money, because it's indeed, as you're saying, it's actually, you don't have to, right? It's like it's optional. You don't have to. But if you believe it's needed, there's like a bucket of money available, and when you work on software, it's an infrastructure that mostly gravitates around the Bay Area. And I mean, it's another place in the world, of course, as well. But I mean, it's like you know, if you want to play in the NBA, then you have to go to the Bay Area. And so these VCs, they somehow need to figure out, like, who's talent that we want to give money to, because you can't show numbers yet, as in, like, certain revenue numbers, or it's all very early stage, right? And so the pond that they fish in is students from Stanford, Berkeley, people who worked at the FANG companies, those kind of things. I had none of that. I was living in Amsterdam. I studied music, and I was writing software for a living. So fighting your way through that, and then in that way getting that validation, was very important to me. And because I didn't have that. I couldn't show. I didn't have a Stanford diploma or anything. Or I could say, look, I worked for 4 years at Google. I didn't have that. So then the only thing you have to show for is your project and what you're working on, and that you are a fighter and that you're going to try to make it work. So I mean, I do think it's important, because some people give up already in that stage before, because they're like, how can I ever become part of it? And the answer is, I'm an example. You can. Just keep going.
How much did you guys have built at that point?
So the first, we had a dependency early on Elasticsearch. And because we decided to build top down. So we started with the APIs, and then Elastic, of course, based on Lucene, had no vector index. So we had the vector index on the side. And then my co-founder, HN, said, if you really want to do this well, we just need to build an actual database. If we really want to do it well. And when we got the seed funding, we still had that dependency. But before we exhausted that money, that it was 100% standalone.
So I guess when it started, it wasn't open source.
Well, it was actually. So it's like, it's a funny story. So if you... I started myself, and I was experimenting with these vector embeddings. I would also experiment with different languages. So if you take the Weaviate repo and you really go back to the first commits, you see it was written in different language, and that all that history is still there.
What language was it in?
Node.js. Because I hadn't foreseen that it would become an actual full end-to-end database back then. Again, we're talking now. It's like 2017 or 17 is a long time ago, but I did know something with these embeddings. It's funny, there's actually a Google podcast. It's called Stack Chat. It's on the Google YouTube channel, where you find a interview with me from way back, where I talk about Weaviate, but in its previous form. So we talk about the embeddings, we talk about search with embeddings, but how I talked about it was different, right? And how Weaviate back then was built was different. So that was the early version. But before we did our Series A,
why do you switch off of Node?
Oh, that's very easy because the when we figured out it needs to become a database, we needed to have a language that in which you could actually build a database.
I've never seen a JavaScript database, but now I'm thinking about it. JavaScript's one of the most optimized languages. You don't exactly have access to pointers, but I wonder if you could make it work.
No, but but I mean, we have now database competitors that written the whole thing in Python, right? But the problem is, at some point, you need to go to a lower level, right, of the stack to really optimize for larger use cases, and you're just gonna get stuck with these kind of languages. At some point, you're gonna get stuck, and that's why and most databases today are still written in like C, C++. Rust is now a thing. Go. That's why you see those the older ones still in Java, because it's otherwise you just can't do it. And I mean, this is beyond out of my realm of expertise, but what I see. I mean, so for example, we have certain optimizations in Weaviate are written in assembly. And that's just easier to do with those kind of languages, right? So it's you could theoretically do it. I mean, it's interesting. It's also the question, what is a database, right? So that also plays a role in it. But at some point, like from a market perspective, making money from a database perspective often sits in the operations. So you want to have the right controls to operate to create operational excellence in how you want to operate the database, and that's very hard to do with languages like Python, JavaScript, those kind of languages.
That is actually a great question. What is a database to you?
Yeah, so it's funny that you asked that, because when I said it, I was like, oh boy, now you're of course going to ask me what the definition is. So for me, the definition. So I look at it more from a DX, from an experience perspective. For me, it is CRUD support. So you can create a data object, you can read it, you can update it and delete it efficiently and reliable. So that means that if I create a data object or a row in a table, whatever, and I leave the database be for a week and I come back, that it's still there. Right, that I still can retrieve it, or that I can update it, or that I can delete it, and that is, for me, a database. That's it. It's like reliable and persistent. That's it. And then we have all these flavors on how we can do that for all these different use cases that are around, and it can be different indices. When you talk about search, for example, the vector index, there can be separation of storage and compute if you have more OLAP kind of use cases, but the in its core, that is what I believe a database is.
How have you seen AI change since starting Weaviate?
Well, first of all, we didn't call it AI. We just called machine learning, right? I was extremely hesitant to use AI on our website. I was like, really? Are people going to buy that? As in like, but we had to. So that's a change that I've seen. Just the use of the term AI, that it was okay to say that. What I've also seen is how should I say this? So if a gold rush is happening, it attracts, a certain type of people, right? Who go like, who try to figure out how can I make some money out of this? And in some way, I'm guilty of that wave as well, in the sense that in the early days, it was, of course, only an academic exercise. So I was already one wave after that, when we were more like, hey, we as developers or entrepreneurs, like, hey, we can do something with it, right? But then it started to change to people who were just trying to just make a quick buck and that kind of stuff. Everything that happened in cryptocurrency was not helping. So when the debacle with FTX happened, all of a sudden the crypto boys became AI they became the AI crowd. All of a sudden, they also knew something about AI. And I was concerned about that because I was like, we are working on, with our peers in the space, of course, that includes our competitors, but also our partners, etc., just the community at large. We really try to make this into a thing that people can use and benefit from and can build new business on top of. And I was really concerned that with the weird claim. I mean, remember there was this guy who sold AI courses, and then he was like he charged about $100 for it, and then he had something like, solving the stock market or something with, and they had people pay for that. I was like,
many of these.
yes, and I was like, oh boy, that's not good because if people start to see too many of these scams, before as an industry, we really have shown the added value we can bring to companies, and we're now talking, 1.5 years back or something. I was really concerned about that. So that's a big change that I've seen. But it's it comes with growth, right? So there's an opportunity and people jump on it. So I was concerned about it. I was fine with it most of the time. It was like I was concerned that before we actually got where we wanted to be, showing how we were bringing value in this new way of doing things. But that, knock on wood, but that luckily didn't happen. But it was like I was concerned about that. So that is a big change that I've seen. Also a change that I've seen, and that is something that's really awkward to go through yourself. So is that innovator's dilemma was absolutely happening with incumbent players. And for a long time, the question of where are they? We have these new startups. We're doing this vector search stuff. Where are they? And what happened, because AI was growing, yet all these companies, I mean, Google is a good example. So 2 years ago, no, I might be, or a year or 2 years ago, I might be wrong, but so Google I/O is happening. And they say like, you can use our at the keynote, like not a breakout session, the actual keynote. They say, hey, you can use these embeddings. These are the partners we work with. And we as Weaviate were on the screen. No big existing database players on it because they didn't offer that service yet. So there was this time for over a year that these big companies, Intel does a keynote. And they show what you can do on the Intel cloud or something during the actual keynote where the CEO is. And the presenter says, like, I built the following with Weaviate. And he goes, and we're like, what, really? And all these kind of things were happening with all these big players that because the incumbents were just not there. So we just could keep building, build customer base, build community, build product, etc. While it was just a greenfield. And that was something that was really fun, but also, kind of weird to just observe that. Don't get me wrong, I was so proud on all these things, but I was like, now if you go to the Gemini websites from Google, right? So it's like, what is it, ai.google.dev or something? This is a big Weaviate logo on it. I'm super proud of that, but I could not have imagined that would ever happen. So that has changed. That because people started to see what the capabilities were of AI, plus the fact that there were only new players in the space, that we just stepped right into the opportunity. We just didn't have to do anything. We just walked right in. And that shows what a seismic shift is happening in the space, because I have a friend who has a leadership position, had a leadership position at Google. And he's like, do you know how abnormal it is that Google reaches out to you to ask if they can use your logo rather than you asking them if they want to use your logo? He said that hasn't happened for years. And now this whole AI thing opens up. And then Google is just one example. There are many of these examples. So that is something that's changed, and I'm super proud of that. So that, yeah.
I think that's definitely something to aspire to when building a startup.
Yeah, yeah. That's also to do with but this is also the what's fascinating in building a startup is that um, there is this, and again, it's for me. I'm very 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 aware that that we also got lucky, right? That, and with lucky I mean that who knew that it would take off the way it did, right? So, but if you have a startup idea, there's an interesting correlation between if you decide to you take VC money with the amount of money you raise versus how conservative you become in building product. Because if you have no money, or you have, I mean, even YC money, right? If you don't have any money and you're with your co-founder, you can do whatever you want. You can go as crazy as you want. But then you go, okay, now I want to apply for YC. Let's tone down a little bit the craziness, because otherwise it's just gonna we're not gonna get anything. And they get the money, and then you do your seed, and you go, yeah, let's tone down a little bit, right? Because we now, and that is unfortunate. So this is like with category creation, then you could argue like just keep looking, keep searching until you found that niche that you can create a new category around, and because otherwise you just get swallowed up by the by the existing ecosystem.
Your job is to tell people why you're doing something. What is your company mission? And how did you come upon that company mission?
Yeah, so we want to enable and help people to build AI native applications. So let's unpack that. So let's go in reverse order. A vector database is a tool. And what and people use that tool to build applications with. And I honestly believe, as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, like we can sprinkle machine learning over existing applications, or with the state of AI right now, we can really build completely different applications for end users to use and to buy. That is what I call AI native. That is where the AI sits at the heart. The vector database is today a core component of that. But I always tell the teams, like, we focus on helping people building these end-to-end AI native applications. And yes, the database is part of that, but that's just part of it. And then the second thing in that is the word help. So I became convinced that our path to success is by being extremely good at helping people to be successful in the use cases they want to build. So that not only sits in the database, that not only sits in documentation, but that also sits in that we have these modules. That also sits in the video content that we're creating. That also sits that we decide that the language we're using. So the majority of language that we're using is aiming at a broad audience, and it comes back in everything. So for example, my co-founder Etienne, he gave a talk for for Carnegie Mellon for the database group. But even there, how he talks to the students, yes, he talks about complex topics, how the index works and sharding, but the way we do it, the language that is used, the visuals that are used are focusing on, let us help you explain how we do it rather than show off how we do it. So those two things combined, so helping people be successful in building these end-to-end AI native applications where Weaviate is like, bread and butter, basically. That's the mission.
Is there anything that you want to say before heading out? Any final words to the developers of the world?
Yeah, have fun building. This is the time, right? The last thing that happened was mobile phones. Before that, it was the internet itself. This whole new opportunity to build complete new things. The time is now, and have fun. Do it now, and have fun building. That's what I want to give people, as something to think about.
I think that's something that I'm always trying to be doing.
Yeah, well, you are. But, yeah.
And then last question before we have to head out. Is there anybody that you want to acknowledge that was particularly helpful on your startup journey that has been helpful recently?
So I'm gonna give an maybe unconventional answer, if I may, and that is everybody. The further I get in my journey, the more I understand, learn, and appreciate how wonderful it is to work with smart people. It's it that is people, the developer relations team, everybody. It's my co-founder. It's the advisors that we have. It's like investors that we work with. I'm in such a lucky position that I can just talk to these people, listen to them. They share their wisdom with me about this specific area of interest of theirs. And the only thing that I need to do is I need to tie it together. And I am enjoying more and more that I don't know anything. And I'm working with everybody. So the answer is everybody. I'm learning every day from everybody related to the company. It doesn't matter if it's employees, if it's our advisors, friends, community, my parents, anybody. So people, I'm learning every day. So I would like to acknowledge everybody's helping me, trying to make Weaviate a success.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on, Bob.
Thank you so much for having me, man.